and that we can go ahead and get started. We'll add her in.
Okay, great. Are we ready?
Ready to go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Mary Jane Burke here, the Marin County Superintendent of Schools. And you're about to have an opportunity to see what it looks like when Marin County is able to work with such amazing partners to ensure that our community has the information it needs in order to support our kids, our students, our families. And so I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. Please note this session is being recorded. And so within 24 hours, it's going to be available. In our intent, because of our sort of last minuteness and getting the word out, is that we're going to make a huge push to get this out into the community for people to be able to review this. Do note also it's being translated into Spanish. And so, Michelle, are you going to translate for me for a minute?
Absolutely. Hola y bienvenidos. Este webinar se está traduciendo simultáneamente al español. Haga clic en el botón de interpretación de idioma que aparece en su pantalla si desea escuchar esto en español. Muchas gracias a Marta Bitton, que es nuestra intérprete esta noche. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle. And thank you in advance, Marta, for all that you'll do to ensure that our whole community has access to this session. And so with that, I'm going to pass this on to Mike Grant, who's a director at the County Office of Education, who's going to serve as the moderator this evening. Mike, thanks so much, and introduce our panelists.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary Jane. And thank you all for being here on such short notice to come together as a community. And really just to recognize, what has been a tragic turn of events in our world, and hopefully to find some hope, to really, I think, wrap our arms around our kids and one another. And I feel like for me, it's like marking this moment, what we've been through for the last 2 years, kind of the collective trauma of COVID-19. We've really had, at least in my lifetime, unprecedented challenges and conflict. And on the other hand, the challenges that we faced has resulted in many ways, some incredible triumph and unprecedented collaboration in our community, coming together to face the challenges and to do what's best for kids. And now this war in Ukraine. And I gotta say, from my personal experience, and what got me out on the Crosstown Trail partially in San Francisco, is like I was glued to the news all weekend. It was really probably unhealthy, either TV or radio. I was just kind of watching and listening to it unfold. It was very distressing. I spent about 7 years of my younger adult life either in Russia or working hand in hand with Russian people to help build peace between our countries. And I have some very dear friends there. One of my colleagues that I work with every day at work was born in Russia and lives here now. And one of my best friends in the world lives in Fairfax. He's a Russian youth who came here. And I know there's many Ukrainian families, in our community, students and staff and just community members. So, thank you again for coming together on really short notice. From the outset, we have some outcomes for tonight that we're really shooting for. And I think, finding hope and power and opportunity in this crisis. We hope that tonight we can inspire, motivate, and educate one another. Our panelists, we have this incredible group of people that I've just met in the last 2 days that are going to share with us some real tools both as parents and as educators. Tools for understanding what digital well-being is, how we can be a part of that, some practical tips for looking at and deciphering news and information, understanding a little bit more about the developing brain of children and young people, and then 9 specific tips for supporting children during times of uncertainty and stress, whether it's COVID or the Ukraine or other stresses in our lives. And then some practical guidance from a clinician, on how to make sense of what our kids might be, what we or our kids might be feeling right now. And in the end, you know, that we can find some solace and peace in this moment of turmoil, and how we can engage with one another and our young people to make positive change, how we can become the helpers. So, you know, our panelists tonight, again, just people I've met in the past few days that we've had relationships with the past in other areas. But Jamie Nunez is the Western Regional Manager at Common Sense Media. He supports educators, administrators, and parents in modeling digital literacy for students. For over 20 years, he's dedicated himself to redefining education practices by exploring ways students learn from digital media. He's a former vice principal and high school teacher, and an education nonprofit director. He's used digital media as an entry point into understanding the social and emotional well-being of students in academic spaces. And my understanding is that when he's not working, he's out in the ocean teaching his 6-year-old daughter how to surf, which sounds kind of fun. And then Julie Kurtz is also here with us tonight. She's the founder and CEO of the Center for Optimal Brain Integration, with over 30 years of experience working with youth and adults and families who've experienced trauma. She's the author of a couple books called Understanding My Brain, Becoming Human or Becoming Humane, for younger kids ages 4 to 8 and 5 to 10. She also co-authored several books on trauma-informed practices and culturally responsive self-care for early childhood educators. She's a licensed marriage, family, and therapist, providing counseling in the Bay Area and throughout California. And is Emily here? Did we get Emily in? Okay, we're still working on getting Emily Gerber from Kaiser Permanente. She's a licensed clinical child psychologist serving as the mental health director for Kaiser Permanente and Santa Fe Medical Center. She received her postdoctorate from the University of California at Berkeley and completed postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School and the New York University Child Study Center. She's worked as a behavioral health director at UCSF, Benoit Hospital in Oakland. And in addition, she was a founding member of a program called Trauma Transformed. It's a regional clearinghouse in the Bay Area that promotes a trauma-informed system, providing trainings and policy guidance. And tonight, though, she made it clear she's coming to us tonight also and primarily as a practitioner and a clinician, and how she can contribute to this conversation. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jamie Nunez. Jamie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate your intro, and thanks for the kind words. Julie, it's a pleasure to virtually be next to your space. I'm going to give you, I guess, a high five this way, but virtually acknowledge you from Indiana. And folks on the call, Mary J, thank you so much for the connection, as well as the many parents that are on this call. Thank you all for taking time out of your Wednesday to join us. So, here's my perspective, and I'm going to start with the narrative, and I'm going to just spend a little time kind of giving you a news and media perspective and insight on how we might be looking at the work. Right? I'm going to defer to sort of Julie in terms of development and what is actually happening with our kids, given the fact that she's has much more experience working in that particular realm. I'm going to start with a story, and I'm going to kind of let you know kind of what this all sort of means to me. On Sunday, I was chatting with my 7-year-old or 6-year-old, and she was, or 7-year-old now, she was 6 at one point, but she shared with me, we were talking about the news, and it just dawned on her that she had said, "Papa, how do they take people that are injured when there's like a war or something? How do they actually take them to the hospital?" And it just like, it blew me away, right? So I was struggling with like the response. I was struggling to how to actually have a response that works for her. I'm very mindful as a parent what it means to expose her to media or even conflict, but somehow she saw it. There's a conversation she had with her mother, but the point is, it's really difficult to kind of have conversations with your child. It's really, really difficult to explain conflict and trauma. And as my approach as someone that has been in the field of digital media is to always point to what is actually happening in that space and to provide you all a reference point. So in addition to having conversations with your child and being mindful and being present for your child, what I'm going to attempt to do over the next few minutes with you all is lead you through what I would do and how I might sort of address the issue of media literacy amongst this sort of topic that we have. And I want to name a few of my blinders before I start. One is there are many complexities to this issue around war and trauma, and that we don't have the answers to them. And whatever framework that I provide is not going to wholeheartedly sort of address the needs that your adolescent or your teenager might have. And so I want to make sure that I remind you that this framework is not a catch-all. It's simply sort of an attempt, something that you can work through. So practice one of them. That's sort of my encouragement to think through that lens. The second blinder is that I myself have bias, right? Confirmation bias. I want to believe something, and then I want to take in media that can reinforce the belief that I actually have. So I want to recognize that I have that, and I'm also recognizing that I'm attempting to challenge that. So as I show some of the images in the slide in a second, I want to just make sure that you are mindful that this is a perspective that I'm actually taking in this approach. Let me share my screen for you all, just so you know what we can get into. So I want to kind of talk about a framework, right? So let's talk about this framework, and let's get into the well-being of our kids. And what I want to start with is an operational definition that we use at Common Sense. What we believe in is that our kids, when they are able, or as adults, when they're able to think critically about those opportunities and the challenges that they see in the digital world, and then that they're able to use tech to learn, create, and engage, that then they can actually become healthy. That's an assumption that we're operating under, and that's what we're attempting to do when we think about the images that our kids are seeing, particularly as our kids as they get a little older, around 5th grade on, where we start to kind of see that they're exposed to more social media and what they can engage in, right? So here's kind of the framework that we want to like kind of look at. So if I'm exposed to media and I'm exposed to trauma, what does that actually look like for me? And how can I best sort of support as a parent the way to address that? The first is we want to make sure that whatever it is that they're exposed to, that they have an opportunity to pause and to self-reflect. What is it that I just actually saw? Too often, because our kids are layered with too many issues and too many sort of correspondence and communications, it's really difficult for them to really reflect in the moment. And again, I'll defer to Julie in terms of what those techniques are, because based on the work that she's done, there's quite a bit that she could certainly offer. The second is I want to be intentional about what are the facts and how am I modeling facts and evidence to my child. So when they're in front of TikTok or when they're in front of Instagram, are they aware that they can do simple things online to ensure that they are addressing or understanding the difference between misinformation or fake news or information that may stir an upper reaction, right? The third piece that I want us to consider is what does it look like to empathize with other perspectives? And tonight I'm going to show you really quickly, I'm going to show you how we can do that and what are the narratives that are currently out in digital media spaces, in particular TikTok, that you can look at to have very healthy conversations with your child. And then the final thing is once they consider those perspectives, what are the options for them to do something about it, right? So we want to be able to understand a particular point of view so they can envision options where they don't feel, where they feel empowered, I should say, to act on their inclination around something. And then finally, we want them to take action. And that is really the encouragement that I will have for you, which is at the end of the day, as we model this, I will ensure that hopefully you can take action on what you're seeing, both with the trauma that your kids might be seeing with conflict or anything else that they may be exposed to. All right, let's name a few things, and I'm going to go very quickly through this because I want to model for you the framework. We know clearly that our kids prefer social media when it comes to engaging with the news, right? That more often high school kids report that they get their news from TikTok or they get their news from Twitter than any other sort of forum or any other medium. So it's really important to know that as you're working particularly with adolescents, and again, I'm referencing kids 5th grade on, that they are looking more towards social media to gather that perspective and that insight. We also know, and again, this is a probably famous study from 2019 out of Stanford saying that we also know that our kids don't necessarily know how to understand the skills necessary, and they often lack the skills necessary to understand the credibility of that information, right? So there's a tension that goes on, right? That I want to look at what's taking place on TikTok, yet I don't necessarily know how to decipher what's right and what's not. It's important to note these two foundational pieces for your kids. And again, I want to reference that these are pertaining to kids that are in adolescence. And when it comes to younger kids, I will again defer to Julie and I'll give you some insights as well around that. So here's how we're going to model it. I'm going to, not for the sake of time, I want us to sort of see what this might look like. So Mike, you're going to be my little 7-year-old at some point, and clearly you can be my dad at any point, or just a fellow. But I might say to Mike, Mike, you know, you saw something. Before you go to bed tonight, take a moment together, and I'll do this collectively with you all as a group. Let's just take a moment to recognize that there's some people around the world that maybe don't have sort of the benefits and the privileges or the challenge or the opportunities that we have, the opportunity to drink water, the opportunity to be in this particular space. So can we take a moment to just breathe with each other? And then I might hold Mike's heart, or I might hold Mike's hand for a second, and it might be maybe 15, 30 seconds. It might be an entire minute, maybe longer, but we want to recognize this space. So as an effort to model, for the sake of time, let's take about, I don't know, 15 seconds to do that. See if you can turn away from your computer and think about all the blessings that you have, the beautiful things that are part of your life for a second. Thank you all so much. And this is a very short period, but it's helpful to just pause and take a moment to just recognize where that's at. For our kids, especially how it's beneficial for them. So the second step then is, as we think about like then looking at news very critically and thinking and supporting our kids, the second thing I'm going to ask you, and we're going to model for our kids, is a few things. We want them to be able to understand facts and evidence. And instead of giving you an entire lecture on what that looks like, I'm just going to give you 4 things that you can do this evening that will be really, really easy and very transferable for your kids. One is to understand the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And as a recap for all of us, we know that misinformation is really false or out of context information that is presented as facts. And we know that disinformation is a type of misinformation that is actually by design intentionally false and intended to deceive or mislead. And it's important to actually share that and transfer that knowledge to our kids, just so they are aware of the differences, right? That what you may be seeing is extremely, that may or may not be by design, or may be by design to have a certain effect on you. So we want to make sure we are connected with that. This third thing that I want to share with you as a way to model is you want to maybe look at images, not necessarily images that we're seeing around conflict, but we might be seeing images that we might see others. And what we're seeing as a trend is with the onset of the Russian war, what we're seeing is an uptick in a number of social media platforms that were reusing trauma that existed in the Israeli and Palestinian war. We were also seeing VR games that were then imported into the war. So initially, a lot of the things that we were seeing at Common Sense is highlighting or recapping visuals that were already taking place. So one of the great ways that I might be able to showcase is take that image and do a reverse image search. And again, for the sake of time, I've given you a 90-second way in which you can do that as a family. Really, really easy tips for you all. And then the final thing is really, if I were to kind of think about how I might support Seeks and Facts for my kids, is really thinking about teaching lateral reading to our kids. And this is one of the key things. And again, Stanford does an amazing job, and they have a really great resource that I'll point out for you. Is a really great way of evaluating information for your kids and deciding whether or not that information is actually valid or trustworthy. Again, for you all in the call, it's helpful to kind of know what that is. But these 4 themes: misinformation, disinformation, reverse image searching, and teaching your kids around lateral reading. If I were to kind of sum up my entire session on what you can do to educate your kids during this time in this space, it would be these 4 things. Practice that, use that, make that part of your rhetoric and your language as you're discussing media. Maybe you want to model that for yourself. And all lateral reading is essentially the act of verifying something while you're actually reading it, right? So if Mike Grant said, you know, Jamie, I actually bungee jump on the side, I might, as if Mike were to write an article on bungee jumping, I might say, well, what else is Mike doing? Is this actually accurate? Where else has Mike actually found bungee jumping to be the case, right? Or is it false? And Mike, I'm sorry to use you as a constant example, but you're just next to my screen, and I really appreciate your beard this evening. So thank you.
No problem.
The final thing before we get into this, the real piece that we want to get into is you don't need to have all the answers. And if I can sort of give you a hug or a high five at some point, I would encourage you to know that we are maybe not the experts, including myself, including others, that we're constantly learning around the traumas and conflict that our kids are exposing and the amount of media that they're taking in. But the resources that I want to give you all, and again, I want to be mindful of all the links and resources that I share with you, but I'm going to share two, and I'm going to reference these two throughout the next few minutes. And one is our, at Common Sense, we have a news and media literacy resource center where we are supporting our kids to kind of understand what's happening by doing a few things with them. We provide resources to our partners, and we also provide free activities that families and educators can do. So if you're an educator on the call, I encourage you to look at this resource. It's completely free. And then the second thing is I'll reference, we have quite a bit of parental advice articles by my colleagues, particularly how to talk to your kids around violence, crime, and war. So in case you just can't hear me, you can't listen to me anymore because of my tone or I sound like someone that you just don't like in your life, then by all means, feel free to click on this article and I'll leave those reference points for you all. All right, the point here is we're not really thinking about this. The point that I wanted to make in all of this is how does this all make sense for what we're experiencing and for the war and for what my child has been exposed to. So here's what I'm going to share with you all. And here's, I think, how I might just deal and embrace the experience that I'm having with you. It starts with a perspective. And one of the things that I considered in the framework is, or added on the framework is, to what extent are you allowing your child to discuss the narratives needed for those conversations to happen? Right? And I'm going to give you a few things that are happening that we are seeing with digital media. Since the war, we are seeing more so than ever an uptick in the first person journalism taking place. So on the left-hand side, wonderful narration around the Ukrainian conflict through a refugee perspective. Again, I encourage you all to look at lateral reading just to verify whether or not information is being shared across different channels. But this might be a very interesting way for your child to think about conflict and war. So my child asked me at the beginning, as I shared with you, she said, how do hospitals work during this time? Right. And so my perspective might be looking at the healthcare system and addressing these issues with my kids. So I might then have conversations around how things are taking place. Maybe your child is thinking about, well, what's happening to the Russian folks in Russia, mom, dad, like auntie, what can I do? And then the person on the right here, again, it's another social media or Twitter account, is referencing things around the impact that this war is actually having on Russian citizens. So wherever you're at within the spectrum, it's really important to note and to highlight and to pull some of the narratives that your kids are interested and curious about. Right? If your kids say like, well, how do people die or what's actually taking place? It's going to look entirely different, and we can have those conversations at some point. But I encourage you to pinpoint some of those first person narratives as a way to draw out those conversations and as a way to consider options. And then here's where I want to kind of close with that I think is really helpful and also can be extremely problematic, right? I want to name the two, and I want to name how challenging it can be to kind of recognize the differences. For many of our middle schoolers and high schoolers, TikTok is their platform for everything. It's a platform to communicate, it's a platform to engage and express themselves. It has, as of recently, also been a place where they are building solidarity with folks from around the world that they may or may not know. And what I'm going to share with you now is 3 ways in which you can look at TikTok and start to pull from the narratives that you're seeing. So if you were to type in on TikTok or ask your kids to do that, you would see a number of things taking place. On the left-hand side, you might find that support and solidarity and showing solidarity is through making changes to your consumer habits. This is I'll share with you all, this is a TikTok from Purple People Eater who says you need to change the way you can purchase things on Etsy. I'll share that in a second. Let me just share this so you all are aware of that. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to stop my screen and then share my screen with the audio so you all are aware of that.
If your For You page has been full of Ukrainian content on the war that's going on and everything that's happening, I need you to stop for just a minute. I can't remember whose I saw the other day, but somebody posted a thing saying if you want to do more than just supporting like the overall organization and donating to them, go on Etsy. And you can go on Etsy and you can change it in your search settings, and I'm going to show you real quick. Okay, so you go to Etsy, you type in Ukraine, and then it brings that filter spot up in the top. You go to shop location, and you can enter in a custom location. So you enter in Ukraine. It brings up shops only located in Ukraine. So like there's $12, $18, there's like a $6 necklace. Even that $6 necklace can buy someone a meal or a little bit of gas to get across that border.
So you'll notice on one side what this teen's attempt to build that solidarity is, right? So she's looking at the platforms that she's in. Others, and we're seeing an uptick this week in particular, as others have, TikTok is often used as a channel for music and expression. This is a TikTok user, she's called Music by Amor, and she recently created a song that appears to be going viral, but you'll see that. And this is, she's taking the song Where is the Love, and she's adding her own sort of flavor to it. So I'm going to share sort of what that solidarity as you think about envisioning options and outcomes look like.
What's wrong with the world, mama? People fight and think the world's gone cold, mama. People dying when alone in their homes, God. Innocent people take their lives as it's a joke now. And overseas got the bosses doing talks now. But we still got murder in the big towns of Ukraine. Help Ukraine. The bombs and the guns and the World War III.
So you'll see in this case, this is another expression where our kids are saying, you know, this is how I want to build a connection with you. This is sort of the way in which our kids might be seeing this space. So this is another way as you envision sort of an option, what that could potentially look like for your kids. And then the final piece is sometimes kids will often resonate with wanting to belittle sort of the opposing sort of side. And this is a teacher / user that has quite a bit of followers, younger followers. This is Miss Julian Morrison, who talks about the Ukraine and some of the things that ways in which Ukrainian people are actually resisting the war. And I'll just briefly kind of highlight this.
The fact that the people of Ukraine right now are absolute effing badasses. Take a listen to this audio coming out of Snake Island, a small rocky island off the coast of Crimea controlled by Ukraine.
So you will see, if we were to kind of continue this, you will see in this case, this is a way in which they're building resistance, looking at, and again, I encourage you all to think about what I shared with you about seeking facts and being able to be mindful about these issues. So what I'm hoping to kind of invite you all to think about is these platforms, while there's quite a bit of negativity surrounding them, I can go on and on about these issues related to these platforms. At this point, the way to sort of build solidarity, if your child is using any of these devices, you may want to kind of filter out for what those experiences are and then pull from what you think those options could potentially be. And then the final thing as you close that is, or as you think about taking action, is looking at sites that could potentially help with that, right? So on this case, I'm saying, how do you want to show solidarity, Mike? What are the things that you're doing? And then in this case, you're actually doing that. So I'll close with this few takeaways and then really defer to Julie and have her connect. If I were to kind of just sum up everything, I might say this. One is take a moment and build those moments from your kids this week. Really, our kids have gone through a lot over the last 2 years, and more so now. It's helpful to affirm their presence and name what is actually happening. Second is I encourage you all to sort of deconstruct with your kids their understanding of conflict and media's depiction and sensationalization of war. And then finally, if you have the means or resources or the time, consider, as I pointed out, some of the resources that we pointed out to either donate or to talk to your kids about how you want to actually take a stand in this space. I will stop sharing my screen. And Julie, I'm dying to kind of hear from you, but before I do, I'm always happy to take any sort of initial questions, or Mike, I'll defer to that piece, but if not, I'd love to give Julie the space.
That's great, Jamie. Yeah, thank you. And what I want to do for the audience is to let you know that the Q&A is open and the panelists can see it. And so feel free, if you have comments or questions as we go, you can put them in and we can either have our panelists address the questions as they come up or kind of collect them and gather them for the Q&A at the end. And I also want to welcome Dr. Gerber. Thank you, Emily. I know it's been a challenge getting on. I think we have you by phone. Can we just do a sound check? Melina, can you just see if we can hear her? We can't promote you as a panelist, but we think we can hear you can you do a sound check? Do we hear her? Okay, so we're going to try to there we go.
How about now?
There we go. Hi,
Okay,
Emily.
hello.
Welcome.
Hi, I made it.
It's been a journey. It's been
Thank
a journey.
you. Yes,
Well,
it has. It has.
Yeah, well, so here's what we're going to do.
Glad to join you.
Yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to hand this over to Julie, but if we'll keep you unmuted, and we want to welcome you to join in or jump in if you have a question or comment, but we can carry on. We're going to pass it to you now, Julie. And again, ask everyone to welcome anyone to put questions in the Q&A as we go. Take it away, Julie.
Thank you, Mike, and Jamie, thank you so much. I'm going to refer to a couple of things that you both said that really inspired me, but really, I'm going to start with what Mike said, which is, let's wrap our arms around each other, our kids and ourselves. I can't say it any better that in times of stress, the number one pathway for regulation is our connection with others. And so with that said, I'd like to talk about the three parts of the brain because it'll help us understand why we have the reactions that we have. The red part of the brain, if you see it on the visual, is the bottom of your brain. It's the most primitive part of your brain in between your mouth and kind of the base of your neck. This part of our brain is beautiful. It's designed to keep us alive as long as possible. It makes us hungry, so we eat. So we live longer. It makes us tired, so we sleep, so we live longer. But it's also responsible for 3 F words to protect us in real or perceived danger. Those 3 F words are fight, flight, and freeze. In fact, if I get cut off on the freeway, my pupils dilate, my heart increases, my breathing increases, my blood pressure, body temperature, all the sensations mobilize to save my life by making me swerve out of the way in a nanosecond. I love this part of our brain. This part of our brain, however, also activates in perceived danger. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. As we walk up the staircase of your brain and my brain, we get to the blue section on this visual. If you can see it, if you can't, it's in between your eyeballs and your mouth. It's called the limbic brain. This part of our brain is responsible for 2 things: emotions. Emotions can be small, medium, or large, and it's also responsible for this neurobiological wiring we have in our brain, where neurobiologically we're wired for connection. That's why I love what Mike said when he said, let's just wrap our arms around each other and take care of one another, or even what Jamie said when he took us through that activity with his daughter, or what we can do by holding our child's hand. It's that relational connection that's the number one pathway to make us feel safe. Now, if you look at the left picture, in the blue section of the limbic brain is something called the amygdala. I'm sitting in a hotel room right now in Indiana at a conference, but an alarm could go off in the hotel to warn me there's something wrong, but in our brain, it goes off too. Now, it's not a sound you hear, but it is an invisible almond-shaped device in your limbic brain that actually goes off when the emotions in your limbic brain rise too high, or you have real or perceived danger. And when that alarm goes off, what happens is it sends smoke signals down to the hind survival reptile brain to wake up and fight, flight, or freeze. Now, the top of our brain, above your eyeballs to the top of your head, is the executive brain. And this is the part that takes 25 years to develop. You see, when we're talking about children, we're talking about children who generally have immature sensory systems till they're 25. It takes that long to develop the executive functioning skills, the adult type networks that allow us to have self-regulation, problem solving for the greater good, perspective taking, focal attention, abstract reasoning. And so when we're faced with the images that Jamie's talking about in the media, we have to recognize that our children have immature sensory systems, and the alarm goes off in their brain much more than it might go off in our brain. Now, so we have to protect them. We need to buffer their stress. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some tips on how to do that. But one of the things I want to remind you of is when your child has dysregulated behavior, also known as that shark fin, we're tempted to react from the survival part of our brain and fight, flight, or freeze from them or with them. And one of the things we can remember when we're faced with children with challenging behavior or dysregulated behavior, that underneath is that beautiful goldfish. And the story of their dysregulated behavior is always communicating a story. In fact, the story of a lot of kids have a really hard time saying, excuse me, my emotions have risen up really high right now. My amygdala is going off and I feel really scared. Instead, what it looks like is, stop talking to me, or I hate you and I wish you were dead, or nobody loves me, or I'm going in my room and slamming the door, this fight, flight, or freeze. So one of the things that we can do as adults is to remember when we see that dysregulated behavior, to look past the shark fin and remember that the behavior is communicating one of these 4 things. Now, this is not a trauma training, so we're not going to talk about number 4 as much right now, but just expressing something. So when we talk about these tips, some things that can help children who have immature sensory systems till they're 25 feel a sense of safety when faced with things that make us feel a complete, utter loss of control or hopeless or helpless is number 1, predictability and routines. This is one way we can help our children feel a sense of grounding and safety when the whole world feels it's falling apart, is a predictable routine and a predictable schedule. Now, just like Jamie, I wish I could go in deep depth to each one, but I'm going to do a general overarching overview of these things. Listening to kids' feelings. Now, this is hard because when they're saying, I hate you and I wish you were dead, or everybody hates me, or I never get anything, or I wish, Jamie was my dad and not Mike, or whatever it is. The thing is that we'll remember to look past the shark fin, and we remember that that's the way that children express big emotions. It's important to listen, not just to the behavior, not to the weird words that are coming out of their mouths that match the high level of limbic activity or emotional activity, but remember that the more we listen, the more they will calm. You see, we don't want to say to a child that's silly, or there's children starving all over the world, or look at what's happening in Ukraine. Look at all you have. You're so privileged. That's what I'm tempted to say to my kids all the time, although they're adults, right? But if we can just take a breath, like Jamie shared, that 15 seconds of going back into our heart, looking past the goldfish, and remember that when we help kids unload, even if it starts with anger, the research shows naming how we're feeling or what we're experiencing, even if it doesn't make any sense in the beginning, will calm the emotional circuitry of the brain. So even if it's just chatting about things or talking about things or just being present and silent while they talk about how they're feeling. Tip number 3, this sounds silly, but play and spending quality time with your kids. The more we have fun with them, the more we play, the more we can buffer their stress. And if you think about it, the bumper cars. Have you ever been in the amusement park and gone on the bumper cars and your goal is to drive 100 miles an hour into your loved ones and crash into them or strangers and it's fun? Nobody gets hurt. Why? Because that bumper, all these 9 tips are really the bumper that you're going to provide in your child's life to protect them from too much overwhelm. So playing and spending quality time can also be an act of co-regulating the child's internal distress. The next one, anytime a child, when they feel completely out of control, is preparing them for uncertainty. The 3 things that trigger us to be more out of control is uncertainty or unpredictability, novelty, or when we don't have voice, choice, or control. So whenever you are going to present your child with something new, an unfamiliar routine, something unpredictable, like, hey, I said we were going to go to McDonald's, but I'm sorry, we're now not. Like, the more advanced notice we can give kids, the more we can prepare them for uncertainty or unexpected change. That's going to buffer their stress. And I mentioned this, but when we feel a complete, utter loss of control from unexpected life changes or stress, when we give children choice in little things, for example, would you like to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? Would you like to, you have a choice. You can turn off your games now or turn them off in 5 minutes. You can do your chores now or in the next hour. Like silly little things that give them the sense of control releases a dose of oxytocin through their body, which is a positive chemical that makes them feel empowered. So small ways that they can have voice, choice, and control in their lives. Tip number 6, taking care of yourself. You see, when I was growing up as a little girl, we had these old-fashioned televisions with rabbit ears on the top, and the children were the channel selector for the parents. And in fact, what my parents would do is say, get up and change it to channel 4. And then me and my brothers would fight for 5 minutes, and finally one of us would change it, and then we'd have to move the rabbit ears. Why am I telling this? Because the modern day version, Jamie, is that you are the external Wi-Fi to the internal world of your child. Your emotional state is dysregulated. It's called mirror neurons. Children with immature sensory systems absorb your internal emotional state. So when you're in distress, they will be in distress. The younger they are, the more that's true. The more you take care of yourself, the more you'll have not only the energy to deal with their adverse behavior without reacting from your primitive fight, flight, freeze brain, but the more the children are going to absorb your calm. Okay, so I'll just speak to that briefly because I really want to honor Emily's time as well. As number 7, tied to number 6, stay calm to co-regulate children. See, this concept of mirror neurons is really profound. Have you ever been around somebody who's anxious or negative and you start to become anxious and negative? Or have you ever met somebody and got a really bad instinct? Or have you ever gone into a restaurant and had a bad feeling? That's because you have this sixth sense that picks up on the energy around you. Children already have immature sensory systems more than ever. They mostly rely on the adults to calm them. So when Jamie was taking us through the activity of sitting with our child and holding their hand and creating a sense of safety, that was really profound co-regulation. Tip number 8, use the environment to calm children's activated stress. I'll briefly talk about these. These are just 6, there's a million, but 6 common strategies that we all use, you and I and children, to calm our activated stress. Visual strategies. I don't know about you, when the world is falling apart, I start to make checklists. I find myself making excessive amounts of checklists and checking them off. Visually, every time I check something off, I feel more in control of my life. But for you, it might be going to a safe place, reducing clutter in your home or cleaning, dimming the lights a little bit, petting animals, seeing family photos, looking at TikTok. Maybe things that are visual that calm us, like nature, auditory. Some of us calm by music, singing, calm voices around us, nature sounds, going to a quieter area. Tactile. Some of us calm through tactile things that we can touch. Like today I was doing a training here in Indiana and a woman said, I love Play-Doh that smells like lavender. It's the thing that regulates me. So sometimes it's fidgeting, fidget toys, textured objects. Notice your child and what they use. Vestibular are the vestibules in your inner ear, rocking, swinging, swaying, movement. For me, it's walking. It's exercising that stimulates the vestibules in my inner ear. The next one is proprioceptive, deep pressure into the joints that comes from things like exercising, jumping, climbing, yoga, pushing heavy things, lifting heavy things. Some of our kids need that intensive big body movement to calm their body. And the last one is oral. Some of us calm by talking about our problems. Some of us calm by chewing on things, sucking on the end of a pen, chewing on ice, taking a snack, taking a drink, taking deep breaths. And finally, I'll close with tip number 9. If you're observing persistent challenging behavior, I highly recommend you seek out a professional. And that is one thing that we all need at different times in our lives. And so it's okay. I think everybody should be seeking out a professional at some point in their life. I think it's healthy. And so if a child is, the one thing to look for is if they're losing functioning in their daily skills, not just eating, brushing teeth, but whatever they were before is going downhill in terms of grades, social functioning, mental, spiritual, physical, and social things you're starting to see impacted, then you might want to seek out help. All right, Mike, I want to leave time that we have for Emily to talk. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there were any questions in the chat box.
Thank you so much, Julie. Yeah, so there was a question actually that went back to, I think, a media question for Jamie, but I think given where we are, what I suggest is that we'll pass it over to Emily, and Emily would appreciate any, comments,
Sure.
feedback, insights on what, what we've been through to this point, and then we'll leave some time for questions at that point. Thank you so much.
Great. Of course. Thank you so much. So hello, everybody. I'm sorry I can't join you on camera this evening. Zoom has always worked for me, so I'm not sure what's going on. But I am a licensed child psychologist, and I currently oversee services, mental health services at Kaiser San Rafael. And I just think in listening to Jamie and Julie, I feel like they've really kind of covered the whole the whole universe here. But I would just sort of want to just add one thing about parenting and emotions during times like this. This has been a really tough, I mean, it's an understatement to say that it's been a really tough time. And now on top of it, there's this war. And I think one of the things that as parents and adults, we might think is like, well, I really need to be calm. I really need to remain grounded around my kid. I think it's important to know that, you know, it's important for kids to see that we are also emotional, and that we can get scared or anxious too. But it really, what matters is how we handle it. And so they're paying attention to that. And I think there is this also piece around sort of co-regulation. So I think, you know, it's helpful to share that you may be anxious or things may be scary. I think it's also sort of an opportunity, just given how much has been going on. We may think like, well, let's focus on the positive and really kind of stay away from this difficult negative stuff. But what we do when we do that as parents and adults is that we don't give our kids the benefit of being able to grapple with and wrestle with these difficult things that are just hard. Life presents lots of wonderful and positive things, and it also presents these very difficult things and suffering and difficult feelings. And so this is a great, great opportunity to be there for your kids and to support them and to understand them, allow them to actually say, you know, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what's going on for them. That can, again, I mean, I think Julie mentioned this, that can trigger stuff in us. So just sort of having a way to, you know, calm ourselves, recognize our own emotions, but also be able to sort of be open to theirs, and allow them the space to wrestle with these difficult things, because they will become stronger for it. You know, it's natural and it's normal to be having a hard time with this right now, with everything else. So I wouldn't say that you would need to immediately pick up the phone and call a therapist. And I agree with what Julie said, which is that really what you want to pay attention to is how are they doing? Are they functioning? Have things gone? Are they having difficulty getting up? Are they having difficulty doing their schoolwork? Are they not hanging out with their friends anymore? And then, you know, also, you know, just paying attention to and inviting them to tell you what's going on for them. I mean, of course, if they ever say to you, Mom, Dad, with all of this going on, I just don't know if I can stand it anymore. And, you know, that's pretty scary. And, you know, you want to understand that and find out, you know, what do they mean by that? You know, sometimes kids will say that, and they might mean something else than, you know, I want to end my life. And sometimes they actually do mean, I think this is too painful, I want to end my life. So it's important to, you know, really create some space around that, listen to them, understand what's going on for them. And then, of course, if you do hear from them that they actually do want to end their lives, and they have an idea about how they want to do it, that is a time when you want to immediately call 911 or bring them to the nearest hospital emergency room. I think I just want to close by saying also that I think in our culture, we've started to use trauma, you know, for a lot of things, just like, your friend left and you're missing them. That sounds really traumatic. I mean, it's just, I think the culture and the media, and I think I just want to be kind of careful about sort of like, what is it that we're calling, you know, trauma? Difficult things are not traumatic necessarily, you know, and so again, going back to the idea that, it's okay for things to be difficult and things to be hard. And there's, much to be experienced and learned from that. And of course, a lot of love, a lot of reassurance, a lot of holding goes a long way. So I think that's pretty much all I want to say.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, and Julie and Jamie. I'm sitting here listening as a parent, of two older kids who are now in their 20s, and I'm thinking back on all those conversations where I wish I had these tools. I probably made some mistakes. There's no real, there's not really a manual on parenting, but I guess what I find myself doing is taking notes, of, okay, so there's 9 tips, that you gave, Julie, and Jamie, your description of how to approach, the kind of overwhelming array of media and have conversations that help our young people, try to distinguish and decipher information versus misinformation and disinformation. And it's a little, I got to say, as an educator and as a parent of older kids, it's still overwhelming, and Emily, what I love about what you are saying is, look, this is kind of what happens, in life. It's like, I think the thing that's reassuring to me is that it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to have these feelings about the war, about COVID, about this. And what you said earlier to me today, Emily, is this has all happened before. Like, in other words, wars have happened, pandemics have happened, and we as human beings do our best to support one another and get through it.
Right.
And what I'm asking now is, with all the myriad of great suggestions, like, how do you start? Okay, so I'm a parent on this call. I'm a teacher on this call. How can I just do one thing? Is that, it just, there's so many things. Does anyone have any insights on, the next step? And I open it up to the panel. Anyone who has a suggestion, like a place to start with that as a parent of a young child right now.
That's a really good question, Mike. It's overwhelming for all of us. And every tip here tonight was really important. I think, each child's stress is defined by the individual sensory system, not really the event. And so we have to watch our own children carefully and interpret their behaviors and wonder to ourselves, really, what is the meaning? And I agree with Emily that difficult times build resilience. But we also need to recognize, I know for me, I live in a very anxious, sensitive body, and news for me sticks like Velcro, and I can't watch it. Whereas my husband, it's like Teflon. He can watch it for hours and it just goes off of him. So if we both were children in someone's home, we might differ the strategies depending on the child that we have. And so it's hard to give a pat answer of the right thing to do. It's looking at your child uniquely and individually and how we need to protect them as well as build resilience.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think it's also just important, and I love what you just said, Julie, about sort of not making sort of assumptions about, how kids will respond to this. Each kid is put together a little bit differently. So that's why it's really important to, I think, just start by, asking a question like, what do you know about this? And what would you like to know about this? And, how are you feeling about this? And, they may, I think in general, I think at the heart of all of it, kids are just going to want to know, whether they're really young or, teenagers or 24-year-olds, am I safe? And, are you guys the people who are going to be able to take care of me and keep me safe? And is this stuff going to affect my daily life? I mean, I think it's hard sometimes to even know as a kid, like, where's Ukraine? Is that like near Kentucky? So it's like making things really, really concrete and being able to provide a lot of reassurance, and then sort of creating space where, you know, they can talk about what it is that they understand is going on and how they're feeling, and sharing your feelings with them and letting them know that it's okay. It's okay to have to be scared and sad and angry about what's going on right now, because it is scary and angering and sad. It's just part of being human.
Thank you. So, Jamie, there's a question that's come up, you know, from the audience about how do we approach, you know, alternative views and non-mainstream media is the question.
Great question, and whoever posted that, kudos to you for sharing that. And so here's a few things I might sort of suggest. The first is pick up the phone, your kid's phone. And again, I'm mindful of the fact that I'm speaking to kids that have access to a phone, or your teenage kids. If you have little ones, I would, again, defer to Julie and some of the points that were being made about not exposing things that they should be developmentally not, that are not maybe appropriate. But I would say for the kids that actually have access to phone and that are actually on some of these devices and these platforms, observe kind of how they're navigating these spaces. What are they looking at? What are they validating? What are they liking? That might be the first sort of approach to thinking about an alternative, right? So I meet with a group of teenagers once a month, and one of the things that we talk about is like, what are the trends? What are the trends that you're thinking about, and how is that reinforcing what you're looking at? And then we pull out our phones, we like project that on Zoom call. We then highlight kind of what those differences are, and highlight, you know, we deconstruct what the message is, so they have a model for how to navigate that. And what I would encourage you all to think about as an alternative is what are the current sort of mediums that you all are watching, your kids are watching? Is it YouTube? Is it you know, traditional CNN media? Like, what are the news sources? I'm going to give you a few things that you can do, just mostly because I'll defer to the work of the team here. The first link is a comprehensive guide of best news sources for kids that are alternatives to just what they're seeing in the media. And then the second link I'm going to share with you all is a comprehensive list of alternatives to YouTube. So if you have age-based kids that want to see something different outside of YouTube, these are, again, very popular platforms. YouTube is, and then traditional media sources, those are the things that you can vet. What we do is actually vet for age and development, whether or not it's appropriate. We go through a privacy evaluation to ensure that they're not taking information from your child or the information that you're sharing. And we vet for what type of information is being shared in each of these areas. So I encourage you all to take a look at that as a way to think about an alternative source of media. The final piece, and again, I know we're over time, but the final piece I might sort of encourage you all to think about is, because TikTok is such a popular sort of platform for many of our teens and tweens, delve into it. You don't have to actually be a TikTok fan or even a user, but see how it works and see the sort of the nuances and what that is actually doing for your child. Does your child feel overstimulated when they're viewing this media? If so, take a step back and ask them, what are they actually trying to connect with? Who are their users? Who are their friends in these spaces? It's a really wonderful way to kind of delve deeper into the spaces. I started with a story about my child wanting to understand the nuances of a hospital and how things are made. I mean, how people are taken into a hospital. What we ended up doing is I pulled it from a clip from TikTok. I didn't obviously share the whole thing, but I shared parts of what a hospital actually looks like in the Ukraine, right? So we sort of had a reference point. So it no longer became an imaginative piece. It became an imaginative piece with an actual understanding of what she is thinking and foreseeing, right? Which brought up more questions, which I felt like I needed a glass of wine or hug her at that point, but we just need to reflect on that. But so those are the things, sorry to be long-winded, but those are the things that I would certainly consider taking a look at.
That's great. Well, you know, we have reached 7 o'clock. Jamie, Julie, Emily, we can't thank you enough for your, you know, your wisdom and the suggestions you brought forward today, and for being you know, for being here on less than 24 hours notice. And we will share the resources that you gave us. I know, Jamie, you also had a resource. One of the things that's so incredible about the world we live in today is how connected we can be with the families in Ukraine and Russia and the bordering countries who are taking in refugees now, and that there are ways that we will help share about how you can connect directly with the people who are in the biggest challenge right now and what help they need to carry on and to you know, continue to live and thrive in whatever way they can. So we will share those resources as well. But thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight. We'll monitor the community, and if we need to have a follow-up meeting like this, we'll do so. But you enjoy the rest of your evening. Take a breath. Go be with your young people.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Julie. Appreciate
Thank you.
Bye, Emily.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.